Hello everyone, great to be on the CONGRESO FUTURO. My topic today is how can climate scientists communicate their findings in an engaging way? Because the climate science now has a very clear and very strong consensus on global warming. We do know enough about the Earth's climate system, but there is a lack of understanding as to how the human brain responds to that climate science. So my topic, therefore, is today not the climate science, but how people respond and how we go from knowledge to action. In 2018, we had what some people dubbed the summer from hell, with wildfires all over the place from country to country, and 19 of the 20 hottest years have occurred since 2000. And in 2018, also the IPCC report came out on 1.5 degree warming just after this summer. And there was very clear on how much would be the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, particularly more heat waves, less fresh water, more floods. We'd lose all the corals. Also, this year, we started the climate strikes worldwide, led by Greta Thunberg. And it was spurred by the brutal news that we never had as high climate carbon emissions as in 2018, and 2019 was just the same one. So now we'll shift into the issue of all this news that you all know have happened. How does the human brain respond? And how do we get people to engage in solving global warming? And to answer this question, I would like to start with running 2 short experiments with you. Now, your task is to notice if you feel any different as I speak, okay? So here I go. Number 1. We see rising carbon dioxide levels, now above 412 ppm. To avoid the RCP 8.5 scenario, we need rapid decarbonization. The global carbon budget for 66% likelihood to meet the 2-degree target by 2100 is approximately 800 gigatons. That was number 1. How did you feel? Here we do another one. Science tells us we're heading for an uninhabitable Earth. Monster storms, killer floods, crazy heat waves, devastating wildfires, a blazing sun is going to cook us, economies collapsing. 2019 and 2020 has been so warm that scientists are running for the hills. We now have only 10 years to cut emissions in half. In half, if not. We'll soon live in a boiling Earth, a hellhole. Cut. That's number 2. So, okay, did you notice any difference while you were listening? The first take may be detached or confused. The other may be fearful, angry, or just, as the English say, comfortably numb. These 2 modes of communicating doesn't really create engagement. And the biggest obstacle to dealing with climate disruption actually lies between your ears. It's about 6 inches thick, the brain. Building on a rapidly growing body of psychology and social sciences, I've explored the 5 inner defenses that stop people from engaging when they hear this kind of news. First, when climate news comes straight at people, the first inner defense comes up, which is distance. When we hear about the climate, we hear about something distant in space, like melting ice and glaciers, or distant in time is the year 2050 or the year 2100. The problem is often described abstractly, as in ppm levels that are impossible to see. And it's slow moving, and its planetary scale, think gigatons and centuries. In other words, it's not here and now. It feels far away from me. It's distant. Also, it's outside my circle of influence. So I cannot do anything about it. I feel helpless. In our everyday lives, we prefer to focus on nearer things, such as our job, our children, or how many likes we get on Instagram. Now that's real. That's close. After this distancing, the next inner barrier is doom. Climate change is very often framed as a looming catastrophe, a crisis, bringing loss, costs, and sacrifices. That makes many people feel fearful or guilty. But after the first fear is gone, my mind typically wants to avoid the issue itself. That's how doom barrier creates a backlash. And after many years of scary climate communication and many cyclones and storms and melting icebergs, people get habituated and finally desensitized to this doom overuse. We could say we're suffering a kind of apocalypse fatigue. We get numb from all that collapse porn. The third barrier is the dissonance. Because if what we know that our fossil fuel use contributes to global warming, conflicts with what we do, which is driving cars and eat beef and use coal, then all this cognitive dissonance sets in. We feel an inner discomfort. We may even feel like hypocrites in order to get rid of this dissonance. Our brain starts to serving up justifications. So for instance, if I know that I have high emissions, and I know also that CO2 leads to climate chaos, this creates this dissonance inside. So the brain starts to come up with justifications. I could, for instance, say that my emissions are really quite small. It's the Americans who have such high emissions. Or we could say, the Americans could say it's the Chinese, or I could blame my neighbor. He has a big car, or my colleague at work, she flies much more than I do. So we can modify then this one cognition, that I have high emissions, but not really that much. Others, them, are to blame. Second, I can try to change the importance of one of these. I could, for instance, say that, climate is always changing. Or third, I can add something. I've installed solar panels on my roof now, so it doesn't matter that I take an extra plane ride or have another serving of beef, so I can feel good about it. In this way, all these dissonances, they create a demand for doubt, in the sense that if I doubt the climate science, then immediately I'll feel better. Dissonance also comes with a social dissonance. For instance, Leonardo DiCaprio, when he at the Oscars said that climate change is the most important issue we all have to pull together, then the next day on the internet, people could take him with social dissonance. Look at how he lives. This is his car, this is his house, this is his other house, and this is his yacht. And has little consistency between how others live and how they speak, particularly the climate activists. If I can point that out, I can also feel a little bit better. Fourth is denial. Denial is a state not necessarily from ignorance or lack of intelligence, but it is a state where you both know something and you do not know it at the same time. You've kind of put the inconvenient scientific facts below the carpet and you live on as if you never heard them. So it's a kind of double life. You both know and do not know at the same time. And also this happens together with my friends and colleagues, particularly families, maybe, that we have kind of made an agreement not to speak about how bad the situation is or what we need to do. Fifth barrier is identity barrier. So if, for instance, somebody who holds conservative values hears some climate activists speak about the need for more CO2 taxes or more government regulations, then they suddenly feel less confident in climate science because they don't like these two recommendations. They prefer, let's say, big cars and small government, not ever bigger government and telling people to have smaller cars. So some newer studies have also demonstrated that when climate scientists or activists tell people what you should do, how you should change your behavior, this reduces the willingness to actually change behavior to a lower level than it was. And the reason is that somebody has criticized my identity. And if I feel criticized in who I am and my lifestyle, then I don't want to listen. I want to attack back. So these 5 barriers, distance, doom, dissonance, denial, and identity, that is why it's so hard to communicate climate science in particular. So what works then? How can we move on? And this is where we get to the 5 S's. There are evidence-based solutions and strategies for how we do create engagement. First of all, we need to flip the distance barrier into making it social. When we bring it home, so it relates to my friends, my family, and my neighborhood, then it feels much nearer, it feels more urgent, and it feels personal. That breaks the distance barrier. So, for instance, if I see someone in the neighborhood putting a solar panel on their roof, then it feels much closer, personal, and near. So one study showed that in a neighborhood, if one neighbor gets a solar panel on their roof, then suddenly the likelihood of other neighbors also getting it is much, much higher than the average in the country. It's contagious, so to speak. Now, the second barrier, doom, can be flipped by making more supportive frames. So we should speak of all the opportunities and the possibilities to counter climate with better actions for your life. So it's like the possibility to eat more plant-based food. This delicious burger isn't made with meat at all. No animal farming, and also the solar panels industry is now employing more than 12 to 13 million people, and we're installing more than 1 million solar panels per day. And when we speak about these, all the opportunities we have, we should speak about 3 times as often as each time we mention the threat. Climate is an existential threat. But yes, there are also so many things we can do. And if you look into the Project Drawdown, for instance, they show 100 solutions to climate change. So we do have all the solutions, all the opportunities are there. Let's speak about them more often so we counter the doom framing. The third barrier can be countered with making the actions more simpler. Often this is called nudging. For instance, if you're at a buffet or someplace you put a lot of food on a big plate, then people would take a bit more food than they need and not eat it all, so it becomes food waste. Well, if you give them a smaller plate, they will take the same amount of food, which is what they eat, and not put more on. So this little green nudge from a big plate to a smaller plate actually is very effective in reducing food waste, with more than 20% at hotels and restaurants that use these kind of buffets or servings. Self-servings. Fourth, denial. If people are reminded about the good actions they're doing, or that their neighbors are doing, or that their teams are doing, for instance, with the help of an app, then these things come up in our consciousness again, and particularly if we can make them social comparisons. So, for instance, this app called Ducky.eco, which where you can do things, click things that you've done, like a vegetarian day or a repairing of your furniture rather than buying new. And then it can add up for your whole company, for your class, for your university or whatever, so that you can see how much your entire team has contributed and who's been the most eager to participate. In this way, we can flip denial into social signals. And finally, there is the possibility of telling better stories, because our brain really loves stories, and it is a way to convey who we want to be in terms of identity. So, for instance, in Oslo, I'm very proud that we are now heading towards 100% electric mobility, not just cars, but also electric buses and bikes. In this sense, we can see how, by using the best of social science and psychology, we can counter distance with making it social, counter doom by making more supportive framings, counter dissonance by employing nudging, and counter denial by giving people social signals and feedbacks. And finally, we need to tell better stories of what society we want and how we can get there, and people who are actually doing something, and companies that are fighting, and cities that are transforming into low carbon cities. These are the stories we need to hear in order for the long-term engagement to stay. And happily, thousands of innovative climate science communicators are now putting these 5 solutions to work.